On the way home, after picking up my granddaughter at school, the 7-year-old gripped my hand tightly. "Grandma, hurry. Let's go into the restroom." She pulled me toward a stall and locked the door. I asked her, "What is going on?" She whispered, "Shh, don't say anything. Look, Grandma." Then she crouched down and looked through the gap under the door. I followed the direction of her gaze and was paralyzed with fear. But before I continue, check if you've subscribed to the channel and share in the comments where you are watching us from. We'd love to know how far our reach is. At sunset in Miami, my 7-year-old granddaughter Chloe and I were walking back home from school. I had bought her a cherry-flavored lollipop, red like the azalea blossoms in the park. Chloe was licking the lollipop, and her innocent smile filled my heart with warmth. But when we walked past an alley that led to the South Beach area, everything changed. Chloe stopped abruptly. The lollipop dropped to the sidewalk, melting into a red stain on the concrete. Alarmed, I bent down and asked, "Chloe, what is it, sweetie? What's wrong?" But she didn't answer. Her big eyes were wide open, staring fixedly at an invisible spot behind me. Her face went pale, her lips pressed tight, and before I could understand what was happening, she squeezed my hand hard, her little nails digging into my skin. "Grandma, fast!" Her voice trembled, almost pleading. I didn't have time to ask more before Chloe pulled me to run. The strength of a terrified 7-year-old girl was impressive. I stumbled, trying to keep up, while my heart began to pound. We crossed the crowded street, but the traffic noise faded in my mind. Chloe dragged me to a nearby public restroom, but she didn't stop at the normal stalls. She ran to the end of the hallway, where there was an old door leading to a janitor's closet. The dry click of the latch sounded like a warning. Inside, the space was so narrow I could hear my own breathing. The smell of chemicals burned my nose, and darkness enveloped us, except for a thin strip of light filtering under the door. Chloe was shaking in my arms, her small body pressed against mine, seeking refuge. She covered her mouth with her hands, trying to stifle her sobs. I hugged her tightly, feeling her heart racing against my chest. "Chloe, what is it? Tell me, honey," I whispered, trying to keep my voice steady, even though an inexplicable unease was constricting my chest. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she pointed. "Yes, look, Grandma." Her voice was barely a thread, trembling, as if speaking louder might summon something terrible. I crouched down and squinted to look through the gap. At first, I only saw the dirty floor and blurred shadows. But then, a pair of bright red, high-heeled shoes appeared before me, like two lit-up cherries in the grey. They moved slowly, step by step, firm and deliberate. The sound of the heels, clock, clock, echoed on the floor, each strike like a hammer in my chest. My heart was pounding so hard that I feared Chloe could hear it. I recognized those shoes. They were Lucy's, my daughter-in-law's, the same ones she had worn to my son Charles's birthday party the week before. Chloe hid her face in my lap, her little body rigid like a trapped bird. Through the gap, I saw the shoes stop in front of the first stall. A dull thud sounded as the door opened, then another as it closed, and then she moved to the second, the third. The thuds continued, rhythmic, cold. She was checking them one by one, like a hunter searching for her prey. My heart sank. I didn't understand what was happening, but Chloe's terrified gaze and the presence of those red heels told me it was no coincidence. Suddenly a voice sounded, sweet but chilling. "Chloe, sweetheart, are you in here?" It was Lucy's voice. I had heard it hundreds of times, calling Chloe to dinner, laughing with customers at the bakery, talking tenderly to Charles. Chloe flinched in my arms, hugging me tighter, as if she wanted to disappear inside me. I stroked her hair, trying to calm her, but I was trembling too. The footsteps approached until they were right in front of the door of the room where we were hiding. The shadow of the heels projected under the door, covering the thin line of light, the only connection we had left with the outside world. I held my breath, feeling the air in my lungs run out. The steps stopped. Silence, a thick, terrifying silence, as if the world were holding its breath, waiting for something to explode. Suddenly, a phone ringing broke the stillness with a sharp sound. I heard Lucy mutter something in annoyance. The heels sounded again, moving away toward the exit. The clock grew fainter until it disappeared. Even so, I didn't dare to breathe heavily, fearing it was a trap. Chloe was still clinging to me, her body shaking, and amidst that trembling, I couldn't help but remember the days when everything began. I am Elizabeth Miller, 62 years old, and a widow. I live in Miami, where the sound of the waves and the smell of toasted bread mark the rhythm of life. The bakery, Seaside Sweets, tucked away in the Art Deco district, is not just my workplace, but also the home of my heart. Every morning, before the sun rises, I get up, and with my hands rough from flour and years, I begin to knead and bake fresh croissants and bagels. This bakery is everything I have, the place where I raised my only son, Charles, alone. After my husband died in a storm at sea almost 3 decades ago, Charles was always a quiet and kind young man. From a young age, he ran around the bakery, helped me clean the tables, arrange the bread on the shelves, or carry the heavy sacks of flour. He wasn't like the other boys in Miami, who preferred to spend time at the beach, drinking soda and laughing loudly. He preferred to stay in the bakery, reading or fixing the old oven. And then Lucy Smith appeared, like a new breeze that entered our lives. She was a regular customer, a young architect who had just moved from Atlanta. Lucy always came in smiling, her shiny black hair pulled back in a high ponytail, and her eyes sparkling like the sun reflecting on the sea. "Mrs. Miller, your bread is the best in the city," she used to say, with a voice sweet as honey. I would smile and tell her she was exaggerating, but inside I felt comforted. Lucy had that way of making others feel seen, valued, and I noticed her eyes sparkled even more when she talked to Charles. Charles, who had always been reserved and shy, began to change. He laughed more, and even shaved more carefully on days he knew Lucy would stop by the bakery. I saw him in front of the mirror, adjusting his shirt, and I knew his heart had awakened. A year later, they got married. The wedding was held on the beach, simple but warm. I stood amidst the sound of the waves and the laughter, with tears falling silently. Not of sadness, but of happiness. I thought that finally Charles had found his partner, and that our small family was complete. Lucy brought Chloe, her 7-year-old daughter, from a previous marriage. The girl's father, Jason, had died in an accident. She only mentioned it once, and I didn't want to ask more. Chloe was a beautiful girl, with big round eyes and slightly curly hair. The first time she saw me, she handed me a drawing of a red azalea flower. "This is for you, Grandma," she murmured, her cheeks flushed. My heart melted. Since then, I loved her like my own granddaughter, always keeping a small croissant in my pocket to make her smile. At first, our life seemed like a dream. Lucy was a wife, and she wasn't perfect. She cooked delicious meals. The smell of homemade turkey pot pie filled the entire apartment above the bakery. She redecorated the house, changed the curtains, placed plants on the balcony, and transformed my small kitchen into an organized and bright space. But I gave one to Chloe, smiling. "This is for you." But Lucy, who was in the kitchen, took the bread from the girl's hands and replaced it with a plate of perfectly sliced fruit. Too much sugar isn't good for her, Mum, she said in a soft but firm voice. Chloe lowered her head without saying anything, although her eyes looked at me as if asking for forgiveness. I started paying attention to Chloe's gaze. She watched her mother, not with affection, but with a strange caution, as if she feared doing something wrong. One night, during dinner, Chloe accidentally spilled a glass of sweet iced tea. The glass broke on the floor, and the girl turned pale, her hands trembling. Sorry, Mum, she stammered, while picking up the pieces. Lucy didn't scold her, she just smiled. It's okay, honey. Chloe cleaned up in silence, head bowed, as if afraid of being punished for a simple mistake. Another time, I sewed Chloe a rag doll. When I gave it to her, her eyes shone, and she hugged it tightly. It's beautiful, Grandma, she whispered. But a few days later, while cleaning her room, I found the doll hidden under the bed, as if she was afraid someone would discover it. My suspicions turned into a dark cloud one afternoon, when I returned home earlier because I had forgotten my handkerchief. I went up the stairs slowly, not wanting to interrupt anyone. As I passed Chloe's room, I heard Lucy's voice, icy. What did I promise you, huh? Never lie to me. I know everything. There was no sweetness, not a trace of tenderness. I froze, my heart pounding. I pushed the door open, trying to seem calm. I'm back, I said, my voice shaky. Lucy turned around immediately. Her perfect smile returned as if a switch had been flipped. Oh, you're back, Mum. Chloe and I were playing storytelling, she said in a kind tone, as if nothing had happened. But Chloe stepped back, and her eyes looked at me pleadingly, begging me not to leave. I smiled back, but inside I knew that Lucy's was just a mask. Behind it was something that wasn't right. And now, after the sound of Lucy's heels faded in the distance, in the small janitor's closet, I waited 2 more minutes, my ear tuned to any noise. Outside, I only heard the murmur of the waves mixed with the distant shouts of someone selling cold sodas. There were no more footsteps, nor Lucy's sweet and terrifying voice. I opened the door carefully, just enough to let in a thread of light. Through the gap, I saw that the restroom was completely empty. I held Chloe up to walk out. Her legs were so weak that she practically leaned entirely on me. As I left that suffocating space and breathed the salty sea air, I thought I would feel relief. But it wasn't so. Chloe began to tremble uncontrollably, as if the fear contained for so long had finally been released. I led her to a stone bench under a sea almond tree overlooking South Beach. I bought a bottle of water from a nearby street vendor, gave it to her, and spoke softly. Take a sip, honey, then tell Grandma what happened. Chloe held the bottle tightly, but didn't drink. She just shook her head, hugging herself, as if she wanted to become invisible. I sat down next to her, put my hand on her shoulder, and tried to keep my voice calm. It's okay, Chloe. It's just you and me here. You can tell me anything. But she remained silent, her big eyes full of tears, looking at her sand-covered sandals. Then, like a breaking dam, Chloe burst into tears. She threw herself into my arms, hiding her face in my chest while her tears soaked my blouse. I'm so scared, Grandma, she sobbed in a tiny broken voice. Mum follows me. Those words pierced my heart like a knife. I hugged Chloe tightly, trying to contain the anger that was beginning to boil inside me. Chloe, tell me, what does your mum do that scares you so much? I asked, my voice trembling, although I tried to keep calm. Chloe took a deep breath, trying to control her sobs. Then she began to speak, in short, fragmented sentences, but full of truth. Mum doesn't just wait for me at the school gate, she said, looking toward the sea. Sometimes she sits at the coffee shop across the street. Sometimes she asks my friend Matthew what I ate or what I played with. I don't want her to know, but she always knows. I listened, feeling my heart contract. Chloe continued speaking, her voice trembling even more. Yesterday, Matthew told me that a very nice lady asked him about me, and he described her just like Mum, Grandma. She was wearing her blue blouse and the red shoes. Chloe stopped, hugging me tighter. Mum said that if I told anyone, even Dad Charles or you, she would get very sad. That she would have to take me somewhere very far away. Her words left me cold. I hugged her tighter, while rage and sadness mixed in my chest. Rage because Lucy had made the girl live with this. I won't let your mum take you anywhere, I whispered firmly, although my mind was full of questions. What was Lucy hiding? Why was she controlling Chloe so much? On the way to the bakery, I didn't let go of Chloe's hand for a second. Her small hands were icy, even though the afternoon was still warm. I looked around constantly, observing every passing car, especially the white ones, like the one Lucy usually drove. Every engine noise, every shadow that moved, made me flinch. The sunset in Miami used to be beautiful, with the sky dyed orange and red like a promise of peace. But that afternoon, those colors only seemed like a warning to me. Something was about to change. That night, when Chloe was already asleep, I waited for Charles to return from delivering the cakes to a hotel near the beach. When he came in, I saw a tired but satisfied smile on his face. "Lots of customers today, Mum," he said, taking off his flower-covered shoes and collapsing onto the sofa. I nodded, forcing a smile. I knew I couldn't keep quiet any longer. I had to tell him what had happened that afternoon. "Charles, I need to talk to you," I began carefully. He looked up, curious but calm. I took a deep breath and told him everything. How Chloe had dragged me to the janitor's closet in the restroom. The terrified look in her eyes, Lucy's red heels, and the girl's trembling words, saying her mother was following her. I told him how Chloe was shaking, about her phrases that Lucy always knew everything and that she would take her far away if she dared to tell anyone. Charles listened, but his expression changed little by little. From concern, it turned to doubt, and finally to slight annoyance. When I finished speaking, he sighed, put a hand on my shoulder, and said in a low but firm voice, "Mum, you're overthinking it. Lucy is just very worried about Chloe. You know how she lost Jason. She's afraid of losing her daughter too, of not being able to protect her." His words fell on me like a bucket of cold water. I looked him in the eyes, seeking a bit of empathy, but only found protectiveness. The girl was so scared she dropped her lollipop. She was shaking in my arms. "That's not normal concern," I insisted. Just at that moment, the bedroom door opened. Lucy came out dressed in cream-colored silk pajamas, her black hair loose, falling over her shoulders. She stood there, silent, her eyes wide open, as if she had heard everything. My heart sank. I didn't know how long she had been standing there, but her gaze, without anger, without defense, full of tears, caught me by surprise. She approached Charles, her voice trembling. "I'm sorry, Mum. I didn't mean to scare Chloe." She lowered her head, interlacing her hands. "It's just that, since Jason, I'm afraid of losing her, of not being a good mother." She looked up and faced me, her eyes full of pain. "I just want to do it right, Mum. I'm afraid of failing." Her words, her tone so fragile, made me doubt. For an instant, I almost wanted to believe her. But the image of Chloe trembling in the janitor's closet, her eyes full of terror, returned to my mind. and I knew I couldn't let compassion sway me. However, Charles was already on the other side. He stood up, hugged Lucy, and patted her back, as if consoling a child. "It's okay, love," he whispered. Then he looked at me, with a hint of reproach in his gaze. "Mum, I know you're worried about Chloe, but Lucy just wants the best for her." I stood there, motionless, and the conversation ended just like that. A few days later, during breakfast, Lucy announced that she had hired a company to install a security system in the bakery and the apartment. "It's to prevent break-ins and keep the family safe," she said, with a gentle but calculated smile. I nodded without saying anything, but a sense of unease began to grow inside me. One afternoon, while cleaning the bread shelves, I discovered a tiny, almost invisible camera placed in the corner of the living room, pointing directly at the common area. Another was in the hallway, where Chloe and I used to play. The blinking red light was like empty eyes. I observed that Lucy's control became increasingly subtle. One day she placed a leather-bound notebook on the table, full of pages written in neat handwriting. "This is the family schedule," she announced enthusiastically. "I think it will help us be more organized and united." In that notebook, she had written down everything. The time I went to the farmer's market, the time Charles made deliveries, the time Chloe went to her ballet classes. She had even noted when I usually took my nap and what time I checked the oven. "Lucy, don't you think this is a bit too much?" I tried to tell her, but she just smiled. "Oh, Mom, it's just more practical. I just want everything to be clear." One afternoon, I arrived 10 minutes late. When we entered the house, Lucy was already at the door, arms crossed and her perfect smile. "Everything okay, Mum?" she asked, with a sweet voice, but without warmth. "I called the teacher and she said you hadn't arrived yet. I got worried." I tried to stay calm and explained that the oven had broken down, but her gaze didn't leave me, evaluating every word I said. Chloe hid behind me, not daring to lift her head. My house no longer felt like a home, but a stage, and Lucy was the director. Every gesture, every word, was under observation. I started noticing small details. How she always wiped the fingerprints from the doorknobs, as if wanting to erase any trace of error. How she organized the spice jars in alphabetical order without a single deviation. Her perfection was no longer admirable. It was a silent weapon, a constant warning that I had to be careful, that Chloe had to be careful. That night, around Luke 2, Geo 0 foot in the morning, the neighborhood was completely silent. Only the distant back and forth of the waves and the faint clacking of the ceiling fan spinning slowly could be heard. I was lying in bed, unable to sleep. The image of Chloe's terrified eyes in that public restroom, Lucy's fake smile, and the cameras blinking in the dark wouldn't leave me alone. Unable to bear it anymore, I sat up in bed, my bare feet touching the cold floor. I decided to go down to the kitchen for a glass of water, hoping that something so simple would calm me. The hallway was dark, illuminated only by the faint moonlight filtering through the window, drawing shadows on the wall. As I passed the main bathroom, a sharp crash froze my blood. Crash! The sound of something breaking rang out, with a force that was not accidental. It wasn't the noise of a cup falling. A yellowish light filtered through the gap, spilling onto the tiles like a dangerous invitation. Inside, I heard agitated, broken breathing, like someone who had just run a long distance. I took a deep breath, trying to make my own breath as silent as possible, and advanced cautiously. My trembling hand touched the door, and I pushed it slowly, just enough to look inside. Lucy was standing with her back to me, facing the large wall mirror. The white light of the fluorescent bulb projected a long, distorted shadow onto the floor. In the white porcelain sink, Fragments of a hand mirror shone like tiny abandoned diamonds. A few drops of dark blood fell from her right hand, spreading over the porcelain like abstract stains of a disturbing painting. Lucy seemed not to notice the wound. She remained motionless, her eyes wide open, staring fixedly at her reflection in the large mirror. That gaze was empty, lifeless, as if talking to an unknown version of herself. Then she began to murmur, in a voice so low that I had to strain to hear. "It wasn't my intention. I told you it wasn't my intention." Her voice trembled, as if trying to convince someone, or convince herself. She held her head with her good hand. Her body swayed slightly, as if caught in a delirium. I stayed still, my heart pounding so hard that I feared she could hear it. Suddenly her voice became clearer, more desperate. "He was the one who fell. He slipped. I just pushed his hand away." Those words chilled me. I felt a coldness run through my body, as if someone had thrown a bucket of ice water on me. He? Who was she talking about? The image of Jason, Lucy's ex-husband, appeared in my mind. But no, it couldn't be. The report said it had been an accident. Or was there something I didn't know? Fear and doubt mixed inside me, making me feel like I was standing on the edge of a cliff. Unable to contain myself, I asked in a trembling voice, "Lucy, who are you talking about?" My voice broke the silence, and Lucy jumped. She turned around sharply. Her eyes went from empty to completely terrified when she saw me. For a second, I saw pure panic in her gaze, like a cornered animal. But immediately she blinked, and a forced, twisted smile appeared on her lips. "Mum, you scared me," she said, trying to sound calm, but her voice sounded strange, dry in the middle of that silence. "I just had a nightmare, a horrible dream." Lucy quickly wrapped her bloody hand in a towel, avoiding my gaze. She hurried past me, murmuring over and over, "It was just a dream, Mum." But I knew it wasn't a dream. The way she had said, "He fell only," wasn't the way of someone who had just woken up scared. It was the voice of someone trying to convince herself of a lie, of someone hiding a terrible truth. That very night, I decided I couldn't stand idly by. I had to find out who he was. The next morning, when the sunrise was just beginning to illuminate the sky, I was already in the kitchen, with a cup of coffee in my hands. When Charles and Lucy came down for breakfast, I tried to maintain a serene tone, and told them I had to visit a sick cousin in a small town near Sarasota, and that I would probably return late. Lucy smiled and nodded. "Take care, Mum. If you need anything, call me." Her smile, as always, perfect, but cold. Charles only looked up from the newspaper to nod. In reality, I didn't go to Sarasota. I went straight to a small cafe in the historic district, where the cobblestone streets and blooming azaleas created a calm atmosphere, far from Lucy's control. I chose a secluded corner, where none of her cameras could see me. There I met with Richard Johnson, my late husband's best friend, a retired police chief from Atlanta. He was a man I trusted completely, someone who had shared nights of bourbon and conversations about the sea with my husband under the moonlight. Richard sat across from me. His wrinkled face showed the years, but his eyes were still as sharp as when he worked. I told him everything. Chloe's terrified eyes, the red heels in the public restroom, the chilling scene in the bathroom the night before. I handed him an envelope with some dollars, not much, but enough to ask him to use his experience to investigate Lucy Smith and her ex-husband Jason. I stayed later in the nearby park, pretending to read an old book, although my eyes couldn't leave the phone. Every sound, every notification, every bus engine that passed made my heart race. A few hours later, the phone vibrated. It was Richard. His voice sounded serious, firm. "Elizabeth, I found him. Jason Mendoza. He died 2 years ago. His last address was in a middle-class neighborhood in a suburb of Atlanta. The official report says, domestic accident, fall down the stairs. Too fast." Then he sent me an address by text message, along with a warning. "Be careful, Elizabeth. Something's not right." Those words left a weight on my chest, as if I had just touched an icy secret. Without thinking twice, I took the first bus to Atlanta. The trip lasted several hours. The scenery outside the window changed from the green palm trees by the sea to the arid hills of the plateau. I leaned back in the seat, my hands clutching my old cloth purse, while a single question spun in my head. What really happened on those stairs? The image of Lucy in front of the mirror, murmuring, "He fell only," repeated over and over like a stuck film. I tried to imagine Jason, the man Lucy hardly ever talked about, beyond mentioning that he had died in an accident. But the tone of panic in her voice the night before, the blood in the sink, and Chloe's terrified gaze, all told me that it had been something much more terrible than a simple accident. Upon arriving at the suburb of Atlanta, I looked for the address Richard had sent me. It was a 2-story house, painted light blue, with a white fence and small cactus pots in front of the yard. But another family lived there now, a young couple with children whose laughter could be heard from the windows. I stood in front of the gate, feeling lost and confused. What should I do? Knock on the door and ask about someone who lived there 2 years ago? I was about to leave when an older woman, who was watering some azaleas in the neighboring house, looked at me with curiosity. She was wearing a somewhat worn floral dress and had her white hair pulled back in a low bun. I gathered my courage, approached her, and told her I was a distant relative of Lucy's family. "I just want to know a little more about her life before," I said, trying to sound natural, although my heart was pounding. The woman, whose name was Helen, watched me for a moment, as if trying to decide if she could trust me. Then she smiled, invited me into her patio, and offered me a glass of fresh lemonade. "Sit down, dear." After a few minutes of light chat about the weather and the neighborhood, she began to talk. "Lucy? Yes, a very pretty girl, but she always seemed tense," Mrs. Helen said, lowering her voice as if afraid someone might hear. "Her husband, Jason, was a good man. He always brought donuts for the neighborhood kids and smiled all the time. She told me that their life looked perfect from the outside. A nice house, Chloe always well-dressed, and Lucy taking care of every detail. But the walls were thin, and she often heard them arguing. Lucy was obsessed with being a perfect mother, Mrs. Helen said, looking into the distance. She controlled everything that had to do with Chloe, the food, the clothes, even her friends. Once I saw her standing outside the school, watching the girl play from afar, without blinking. Then she stopped, looking around as if afraid someone was listening. "The night he died," she lowered her voice even more, almost to a whisper. "They argued very loudly. The whole neighborhood heard them. Jason was shouting that he couldn't take it anymore, that she wasn't right in the head, and that he was going to file for divorce to get custody of Chloe." I felt my throat dry and squeezed the glass of lemonade tightly, Mrs. V. Helen continued. "Jason had talked to my son, who is a lawyer, about gathering evidence that Lucy was unfit to care for her daughter. He was afraid that she would do something inappropriate. After the shouting, there was a very loud thump," she recounted, and her eyes darkened. And then silence, a horrible silence. The next morning, the police arrived. They said it was an accident, that Jason fell down the stairs. But she paused, looking directly at me. Nobody believed it was an accident, Ma'am, but nobody dared to say anything. Lucy's look after that, it was scary. Her words sent a chill down my spine, as if a blast of icy wind had cut through the afternoon heat. I thanked Mrs. Helen, my hands trembling as I set the glass on the table. On the bus back to Miami, I looked out the window without really seeing anything, only images. Mrs. Helen's words, Lucy's terrified whispers in the bathroom, and Chloe's scared eyes intertwined, forming a frightening picture. I returned to Miami when the sky was already beginning to darken. As I entered the living room, I saw Lucy sitting on the sofa, reading a story to Chloe. The warm light of the lamp enveloped them like a perfect painting of mother and daughter. Chloe was snuggled against her, her big eyes fixed on the book. Lucy looked up and smiled sweetly at me. "You're back, Mum. How was the visit with your cousin?" That smile, which had once seemed warm to me, now made me shudder. It was too perfect, too measured, like a mask without cracks. I nodded and replied briefly, "All good, thank you." I had to wait until Chloe fell asleep, until Charles returned from the bakery, until I found a moment to speak with my son alone. I sat in the living room with a cup of cold tea in my hands, trying to organize the chaos of my thoughts. The image of Lucy in front of the broken mirror, her trembling voice, and Mrs. Helen's account mixed in my mind like a whirlwind, dragging me to the center. I had to talk to Charles, but how could I make him believe me? How could I destroy my son's faith in the woman he loved without destroying our family at the same time? Luke 10. Joe 0 that night. After we closed the bakery, Charles and I were in the kitchen, going over the accounts for the month. That night, that was our place, the space that had always been for mother and son, where he did his homework as a child, where I taught him to knead and roll out dough. Now, under the dim light, Charles looked tired, but there was a slight satisfaction on his face as he saw the numbers in order. I closed the kitchen door. The dry sound of the lock was like a declaration. This conversation should not be interrupted. "Charles, I need to talk to you," I began in a quiet but firm voice, although my heart was pounding. Charles looked up and smiled slightly. "What is it, Mum?" I told him that Jason wanted to divorce and keep custody of Chloe because he feared Lucy was not mentally well, and I recounted that fateful night, the crash, the subsequent silence, and how no one in the neighborhood had believed it was an accident. Charles listened, but his expression changed little by little. First it was surprise, then doubt. "Mum, those are just neighbor gossip," he said, with a somewhat annoyed tone. "You know how they are. They love inventing stories." I looked him directly in the eyes, trying to keep my voice steady. "Charles, the other night, I heard Lucy in the bathroom. She said, 'He fell only,' as if trying to convince herself. Don't you understand?" The conviction in my voice finally shook him. He slumped into the chair, put his hands to his head, and murmured, "What are you talking about, Mum? It can't be. Lucy wouldn't. She couldn't." But before he finished the sentence, the kitchen door opened. Lucy was there, with a glass of water in her hand, her eyes wide, full of tears. No one knew how long she had been listening, but that look was enough for me to understand that she had heard enough. "You too believe your mother?" Her voice broke, trembling. "You also think I'm a killer?" The glass in her hands trembled and fell to the floor, breaking into 1,000 pieces. Water splashed onto the tiles, and the crash made both of us jump. Lucy began to cry, not with sadness, but with the desperate weeping of someone completely unraveling. "No one believes me," she shouted, her voice broken. "Not even you, Charles. You don't trust me either." She covered her face with her hands, trembling, as if all the strength she had pretended to have for so long collapsed at that instant. Charles, disconcerted and frightened by his wife's reaction, jumped up and ran to hug her. "No, no, Lucy, I didn't mean that," he said with an anxious voice. "Calm down, my love. Of course I believe you." He held her carefully, stroking her back, with an expression of panic, as if afraid she would break, just like the glass on the floor. I remained motionless, feeling like a stranger in my own house. Charles led her toward the bedroom, but before leaving, Lucy turned to look at me. Tears were still running down her face, but in her eyes I saw something icy, full of hatred. That look needed no words. It was a silent threat. "You destroyed everything. This is war." From the next day, the house became a divided territory. Lucy forbade me from getting close to Chloe. "I think it will be better if I take and pick up Chloe myself," she told me one morning, with a sweet but cutting voice. "You have a lot of work at the bakery. I don't want to give you more worries." I wanted to protest, but Charles's exhausted and pleading look compelled me. At home, the door to Chloe's room remained always closed, and I could only see her in small glimpses when she silently passed through the living room, head down. Dinners became unbearably silent. Charles tried to converse, telling anecdotes about a funny customer or some news from the paper, but his voice sounded forced, as if trying to cover up the abyss opening between Lucy and me with words. We didn't exchange words, only sharp glances like knives. In Lucy's eyes, I no longer saw my daughter-in-law or the woman I had once welcomed into this family. Now I saw someone who considered me her enemy, the greatest threat to the secret and the life she had built. At midnight, a strange noise woke me up. I sat up abruptly, my heart racing, my bare feet touching the cold floor. I pressed my ear to the wall, trying to hear better. Lucy's voice resonated, low but insistent. "Hurry, Chloe, put on your coat. We're going on an adventure, like the princesses in the stories." Then I heard Chloe's voice, small but full of fear and resistance. "I don't want to go anywhere. I want to stay with Grandma and Dad Charles. Mum, let go of me." Her heartbreaking cry was like a knife that pierced my heart. Without thinking, I ran out of my room, barefoot, down the dark hallway. The front door was wide open. The cold sea wind entered, dragging the salty smell. I ran to the balcony and looked out at the coastal street, deserted, illuminated only by a few yellow streetlights. Under that dim light, I saw Charles's van, the one he used to deliver bread, with the engine running. Lucy was pushing Chloe toward the back seat. The girl resisted, her small hands trying to push her away. Her crying was muffled when the vehicle door slammed shut. The engine roared, and the car disappeared into the darkness. The red taillights blinked like two furious eyes before disappearing around the curve at the end of the road. I stood there, paralyzed, feeling the ground open beneath my feet. Without thinking, I ran to Charles's room and knocked hard on the door. "Wake up! Lucy took Chloe. She took your van." Charles sat up, startled, still half asleep. But when he saw my expression, he got up immediately. "What are you saying, Mum? Where did she take her?" he asked in an alarmed voice. I told him everything I had seen, trembling but determined. Panic was reflected on his face. He picked up his phone with trembling hands and checked an app. "The GPS! I have the tracker on the van!" he shouted, with a gleam of hope in his eyes. On the screen, a red dot was moving quickly toward the north. We got into my car and sped down the highway toward the airport. Along the road, Charles called the police to report a child abduction. His voice trembled between fear and rage. "They say they'll block the exits," he muttered. But both of us knew we couldn't just wait. I clutched the door handle, my eyes fixed on the red dot on the phone. The highway was long and dark. Only our car's headlights cut through the night. The sea roared outside, and the wind whistled as it passed through the slightly open window. Charles didn't say a word. His hands clung to the steering wheel, his eyes red-rimmed, as if fighting the thoughts that devoured him inside. After almost an hour, the red dot stopped in an isolated area by the sea. A patrol car also arrived. The headlights illuminated the entire place. Charles's van was there, with the doors open, but empty. Further ahead, on the sand, by the water, I saw a figure. It was Lucy. She was holding Chloe against her chest. The girl's body was trembling. In the faint moonlight, I saw Chloe trying to break free, but Lucy's arms squeezed her like a trap. Lucy cried and shouted toward us when she saw the lights. "Don't come closer! I won't let you take my daughter." She didn't look like a mother protecting her child, but a desperate, cornered bird, ready to break its wings to keep what it loved most. The girl's tears were visible. The officers began to approach slowly. One of them took a megaphone and spoke in a firm but calm tone. "Mrs. Smith, let her go, please. No one wants to hurt you or the child. We just want to talk." But Lucy shook her head, hugging Chloe tighter, backing away toward the shore. "You don't understand," she shouted, her voice in pieces. "Chloe is all I have. I can't lose her." I felt my heart break looking at Chloe. She looked up at me, her eyes full of tears, and moved her lips as if trying to say "Grandma." I wanted to run and snatch her from Lucy's arms, but Charles held me back, whispering, "Mom, let the police handle it. Please." His voice trembled. I stood still, tears falling uncontrollably. I had promised to protect Chloe, and yet there she was, in front of me, out of my reach. An officer, a young woman with a soft voice, stepped forward with her hands up, showing she had no weapons. "Lucy, I know you love Chloe," she said in a serene but firm tone. "But you are scaring her. Look at her. She needs to be safe." Those words seemed to reach Lucy. She looked at Chloe, and for an instant I saw pain cross her eyes. Little by little, she loosened her arms, and Chloe, like a released bird, ran toward me, threw herself into my arms, and burst into tears. "Grandma, I was scared," she whispered, her small body trembling as I hugged her. Lucy didn't resist. She just stood still, looking at Chloe with a mute desperation. Charles, a few steps away, was pale, unable to believe what he was seeing. "Lucy," he murmured, not daring to approach. I squeezed Chloe against me, feeling relief and sadness at the same time. Chloe was safe, but our family was already broken. After that night, Lucy was transferred to the Orlando Psychiatric Hospital by order of the authorities and with Charles's consent. Chloe came home with us. Since that day, the Seaside Sweets bakery was enveloped in a strange silence. The smell of freshly baked bread still filled the air every morning, but it no longer brought. Charles worked tirelessly from dawn until late at night, as if kneading and distributing bread was the only way to escape the pain. One afternoon, while cleaning the shelves, the phone rang. It was a nurse from the Orlando Psychiatric Hospital. Her voice was soft but professional. "Mrs. Miller, Mrs. Smith's condition has improved. She has started talking and she wants to see you and Mr. Charles." I stood motionless, clutching the cloth in my hands. See Lucy? After everything that had happened, a part of me wanted to refuse, to leave everything behind. The road wound through dry hills until it reached the hospital, situated on a green hill. The white walls and well-kept gardens gave a strange sense of peace, completely opposite to the chaos inside me. I took Charles's hand as we entered, feeling it tremble. He didn't say anything, but his look, full of pain and confusion, said it all. They led us to a common room, with large windows that overlooked the Sierra Madre mountains. And there, by the window, was Lucy. She had changed. She no longer had the shiny black hair or the elegant silk outfits. She was sitting, looking outside, with a lost expression. When we entered, she didn't turn around immediately. Charles spoke first, his voice hoarse. "Lucy, we came to see you." I heard the pain in his tone, as if every word weighed tons. Lucy flinched slightly and looked at us. Her eyes no longer had that cold hatred I remembered, only a deep, infinite sadness. She nodded and motioned for us to sit down. Silence filled the room, interrupted only by the wind coming through the window. Then she began to speak, her voice trembling and weak, as if the words had been trapped inside her for years. "My mother left me at the door of an orphanage," she began, her gaze fixed on the distance. "Just before, during a fight, he yelled at her that she didn't deserve to be a mother." I listened, my heart contracting. Lucy told how she grew up in the orphanage, forced to pretend she had a happy life, so as not to feel excluded. "I learned to smile, to make people like me," she said, her voice broken. "But I was always afraid of being abandoned, of being seen as a person with no origin, no worth." I watched her, and for the first time, I didn't see the perfect woman with the impeccable smile, but a frightened child trying to hide her pain behind a shiny mask. "Then I met Jason," she continued, her voice softer. "He was 10 years older, a successful businessman. He made me feel safe. He gave me the chance to have the perfect family I never had." But that perfection crumbled when Jason discovered her past. He started noticing her need for control over Chloe, how she monitored every move, how she didn't tolerate even one mistake. "He wanted a divorce," Lucy said, and tears began to fall down her cheeks. "He said he would keep Chloe, that I was unfit to be a mother." That phrase, she said, was like a direct stab to the heart. That night we argued. Jason shouted the same thing my father told my mother. "A woman like you doesn't deserve to be a mother." Those words were like a switch. Her voice broke. She covered her face with her hands, trembling. I lost control. I just wanted him to shut up. She stopped. She took a deep breath, as if gathering strength to continue. We struggled at the edge of the stairs. I pushed his hand away from me. He lost his balance and he fell. I only heard a dry thud. She broke into sobs, her hands clasped together. I panicked. I pretended it had been an accident. When the police believed me, I thought I could keep Chloe, start over. Lucy looked up and stared at me, her eyes full of pain. Since then, I lived in fear. I was afraid she would tell that I wasn't a good mother. I was afraid of losing her. The room fell silent. Only Lucy's soft sobs could be heard. Charles approached, knelt beside her, and hugged her. "No one wants to abandon you, Lucy," he said with a broken voice, tears sliding down his face. I'm sorry. I'm sorry for not understanding you." I stayed there, motionless, unable to move. For the first time, I didn't see a monster. I didn't see the woman with the fake smile and the terrifying red shoes. I saw a broken human being, a soul full of scars, clumsily hidden behind a facade of perfection. Several months passed. Lucy was transferred to a more specialized treatment center, far from Miami, where doctors said she would need a lot of time to heal the deep wounds of her mind. I don't know if she will ever be the same, but I hold on to the hope, however minimal, that she finds the peace she lost so long ago. Life in Miami, little by little, returned to its course. My bakery continued to open every day. The aroma of baked bread and coffee still filled the air, reminding me that no matter what happens, life goes on. I wake up every morning, knead, bake, and receive the smiles of the regular customers. Chloe's clear laugh now fills the silent corners of the bakery, like cheerful notes in a sad melody. One sun-drenched afternoon, I was behind the counter teaching Chloe how to sprinkle powdered sugar over the freshly baked croissants. She wore an apron that was too big and carefully used a star-shaped paper mold to decorate the pastries. "Look, Grandma, how pretty!" she exclaimed, her eyes shining as the sugar grains fell, forming a bright star. I smiled, unable to contain the joy of seeing her so full of life. "It's beautiful, my princess," I told her. Charles was sitting at a table in the corner, working on the bakery's accounting. He occasionally looked up and smiled when he saw Chloe. The lines of worry on his forehead had softened, although I knew the pain was still there, hidden beneath an apparent calm. He spoke little of Lucy, but he still wore his wedding ring, as a reminder of the love he once felt for her. Watching him with Chloe, I felt some comfort. Our family, although fractured, continued to find a way to rebuild day by day. Suddenly, Chloe stopped her hands, the mold suspended over the pastry. She looked at me with clear eyes, but with some doubt. "Grandma?" she asked in a low voice, as if afraid of breaking something fragile. "Is Mum coming back?" That question was like a needle and thread. A bit of white flour stained her cheek, and I gently wiped it away before smiling softly at her. "Of course, my love. Your mum is in a special place, learning to live peacefully and happily. Just like you. When you learn to read a difficult book, she also needs time." Chloe nodded, although her gaze was still full of doubts. I hugged her, feeling her small, warm body against mine. "Someday, when your mum has finished her lesson, she will come back," I whispered, although even I didn't know if it was true or just a way to console her. She didn't answer, but snuggled closer into my arms, trusting me. In that instant, I knew that regardless of what happened that night. After closing the bakery, I walked alone on South Beach. The sunset dyed the sea in shades of orange and violet. The waves gently hit the shore, with that eternal sound that seems to tell the story of time. I took off my sandals and felt the cold sand under my feet, walking next to the water. The sea wind blew, bringing the salty smell and a sense of freedom I hadn't experienced in a long time. I picked up a smooth stone from the sand, polished by the years and the tides. I threw it into the sea, watching it skip over the water before sinking. "No one can live in the past forever," I murmured to myself. "Sometimes, letting go is the only way to keep what is most beautiful." I looked toward the bakery, where the yellow lights still shone, where Chloe and Charles waited for me. Although this path had been painful, I knew that my family was still there, imperfect, but strong enough to keep going. There are wounds that are not seen, that live in memory, in fear, in that need to control everything, just not to lose again. After everything I lived through, I understood that what we call perfection is often just a mask that hides the deepest pain. Lucy was not a villain. She was a woman suffocated by her past, incapable of loving in the right way. Life, despite the losses, continues. And if there is one lesson I want to leave, it is this. Listen to those you love before it's too late, because sometimes what they need is not judgment, but a hug warm enough for the fear to dissolve. The story you have just heard has changed names and places to protect the identity of those involved. We are not telling it to judge, but with the hope that someone listens and reflects. How many mothers are suffering in silence within their own homes? I sincerely wonder, if you were in my place, what would you do? Would you choose to keep quiet to maintain peace, or would you face everything to reclaim your voice? I want to know your opinion, because every story can become a candle that illuminates someone else's path. May God bless you, and I am sure that courage always leads us to better days. Now, on the final screen, I will leave two of the channel's most beloved stories. I'm sure they will surprise you. Thank you.